Let's, in this nugget, take a look at some of the major stars of the show when it comes to the cast of Juniper devices. This is by no means going to be exhaustive, and this is another one of those nuggets that could take an hour. We won't do that, though. I'm just going to quickly tour you through some of the major product categories. Keep in mind, this is an ever-expanding portfolio, just like many of the major network vendors. Now, if you're familiar with Cisco systems, you know one of the brilliant things that they've managed to do is for almost all of their devices use a central operating system. It's called the Inter-Network Operating System, or iOS, and it runs across a majority of their devices. In cases where they use a different operating system, like the Finesse operating system of the adaptive security appliances or the NX OS operating system of the Nexus devices, they do their very best to keep the commands as similar to iOS as possible. Juniper follows a similar strategy. While there's lots of devices that we can talk about from a hardware perspective with Juniper, there's the June OS operating system that is going to be consistent across most of the devices. Now, transitioning to a discussion of the hardware, one of the first things we learn right out of the gate as we look at the M series devices here is that routers come in all shapes and sizes. That's right. And all kinds of speeds and feeds on these particular devices. The M series from Juniper are enterprise scale routers. They're going to feature things like layer 3, layer 2 VPN services, and they're going to, again, really be focused on moving packets at layer 3 as quickly as humanly possible. Remember, with the M series, we're talking about enterprise scale. So service providers, Fortune 500 companies, those are the audiences most interested in the M series. But I want you to also recognize the fact that within a particular portfolio of products, like within the M series, there's all kinds of differences in scale. So that's really, really important for us to recognize. We've got larger M series devices capable of more throughput, and we do have smaller devices for different positions within a particular enterprise. But wait a minute, what about the little guy? What about the smaller enterprises that want to be routing traffic with Juniper technology? Well, enter the J series. The J series devices are indeed targeted at those smaller organizations. With the J series, Juniper does things like a virtual separation of the control plane versus the data plane. This allows them to create a device that's less expensive for you and I. By the way, this implies directly that with more robust equipment like the M series equipment, there is indeed a hardware separation of the control and data planes. So that's a big difference, giving us much better potential performance and security and stability and all that great stuff. But of course, the hardware separation with those enterprise scale devices comes with a larger price tag. Now, many of you at this point are saying, wait a minute here. If I'm going to go with something like a J series, I would probably want to go instead with the SRX devices. And we'll talk about these in a moment. They do indeed compete head on with the J series. The SRX series devices, though, are not typically going to have, in fact, let me get rid of the word typically there. They are not going to have the interface options that we have with the J series. So one of the reasons we will often see J series in the smaller enterprise instead of just SRX devices is that robust selection of potential interface connections. And that brings us to our final category of routers for Juniper, and that's the MX series. The MX series is often referred to as 3D devices, 3D. What does that mean? It means that Juniper here is really going for a variety of scaling, so we can get extreme scalability. You can see that just in the form factor of one of the models. The other thing is availability. So we're looking for the highest levels of uptime. Tons of redundancy features built into this device, or these devices, I should say. And then agility. Now, what in the world does agility mean? Does this mean the routers could double for an Olympic gymnast? No. No, it means that the router is extremely flexible as to what it can do for us. So all kinds of layer 2 and layer 3 type services here, including massive amounts of security. So you have really, really flexible devices and how you can implement them. It used to be that MX devices were targeted to the edge of the network, but sure enough, with the agility and the flexibility of these particular devices, we can use them, and you see them just about anywhere within an enterprise network. Now let's turn our attention to Juniper switches. But wait a minute. This is not our layer 2 switch Juniper icon. I see a router inside there, and then it's in a square box. Yeah, this is a layer 3 switch icon. A lot of the EX series from Juniper are going to give us layer 3 routing capabilities in addition to the layer 2 switching capabilities. Sure, there are EX series that are just layer 2 only. Once again, we see within a family, in this case, the EX series switches from Juniper, within that family, we have a lot of different capabilities and scale and price tags as we move through various feature sets. But what about the data center? What about just incredible levels of bandwidth when it comes to switching with Juniper and incredible levels of scale? Well, that's where the QFX series comes in. Again, if you're familiar with Cisco systems and their product portfolio, we're now talking about the equivalent of the Nexus operating system switches that we find in the data center in a particular Cisco shop. So the QFX series, just incredibly robust devices for the data center. Here's where you start getting into like top of rack switches and end of rack switches, and you start getting into the virtualization of switches where they start, even though they're separate devices, in a virtualized environment, they start acting as one device. I should probably point out that this capability is also available with some of the higher end EX series devices from Juniper as well. It's just that whenever we get into the data center scale products, virtualization, of course, rises to the forefront. And we wrap up this product portfolio tour with the SRX devices, the SRX series service gateway devices. These have become loved around the world, and not just because of their pretty blue color. No, it's because they're amazingly flexible for what they can do for us for a relatively low price tag. You ready for this? They can function as our firewall. They can function as our switch. They can function as our Wi-Fi device. They can function as our 3G device. They can function in our voice over IP implementation. They can function as our router. It is no wonder that the lower end of these particular devices tends to be the equipment that we have in our Juniper practice labs, including, dun dun dun, my Juniper practice lab that we have been using throughout this particular course. In fact, let's slide over to eBay right now and see just how economical it would be to build a practice lab using these flexible devices in the used market. So here's what I grabbed for our lab equipment for class. It's the SRX 210. Here it is on eBay for $149.99. Just as an example of a sample price there, I notice it's trending at $209. So we can build a practice lab, and I grabbed 4 of these, but by no means do you need that many. In fact, if it was your goal to initially just practice the Juno S operating system, you would get 1 of them. That's right, get 1 of them to start. You have amazing flexibility with these devices, remember. You're routing, you're switching, you're doing firewall services. So, a great option when it comes to the home lab, and obviously a great option for smaller enterprises that have limited budgets. Even, of course, they're going to be buying these new from Juniper, but it's still going to be an affordable option for them to do things like routing, switching, and security at the edge of the small network. Now, should you want even more information about any of the particular series of devices that we covered in this nugget, your source, Juniper.net. You better believe it. Just head up there, head to their products area, or just do a search on like SRX or MX or EX or M or J series devices. I did not intentionally provide materials here in the Nugget Lab files for you, other than flashcards, of course. I didn't provide PDFs on these product portfolios because they would go stale right as I parked them up there, and I don't like disseminating stale materials to my students. So understand, this is definitely an area where you want to head to the vendor's site, in this case Juniper, and research the latest developments in the product portfolio that you are interested in. I sure hope this nugget was informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing. But before I do that, a question that I get oftentimes on a nugget like this is, would they ever ask me something product specific in the exam environment? The answer is yes, but they won't hammer you. You would never fail the exam based on this. And the other thing is, they stay super high level. So they're not going to be like, what exact EX series gives you this, this, and this? Unfortunately, that's a mistake that other networking vendors have made with their certification exams. I'm proud to say Juniper is smart enough to avoid that. They would ask more broader questions like, what is the data center switching family? And you would say, oh, that's the QFX. Or they would say, what device is relatively low cost but can do firewalling, switching, Wi-Fi, voice over IP, and routing at the edge? And you would say, oh, that's the SRX. Or they might say, what things can route and firewall, and give you a pick list. So there'll be very few questions in this area. They will be high level. You will have no problem with them after reviewing this nugget and utilizing my flashcards. And now I say for you, for the last time in this nugget, I sure hope you found this informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.